Hello, and welcome to this lecture for Philosophy 203, Ethics. The topic of today's lecture will be the trolley problem. This is an article by a philosopher named Judith Jarvis Thomson. She, of course, is not the first person ever to come up with trolley problems. Trolley problems have been a kind of staple of discussion in ethics, as they form a very ready example of a couple of things that we'll see in a bit. I believe Philip of Foot, the famous ethicist, was the first one to really make use of a lot of trolley cases. And of course, the trolley problem is probably more, people are more aware of the trolley problem these days than ever before, partially thanks to an episode of a comedy called The Good Place, which I think won some awards, and it's about the trolley problem. So without further ado, let's go ahead and just jump right in. Now, I will say this, I wanted to lead off this lecture with a few questions. Because one of the difficulties that people sometimes have in this course is really sort of anticipating what kinds of material they're supposed to be responsible for, because it's a different kind of reasoning that I think people are used to doing, or a different kind of studying that people are used to doing for other courses. And so I'd like to start off with just a few sorts of questions of the kind that you might run into, say, for example, on an exam concerning this particular piece. Now, titles are important, right? This is one of those things where, nobody ever specifically tells you to read a title, but titles are always important because they highlight some big feature, some major feature of the thing. So the title of this piece is called The Trolley Problem, okay? So here's a question you might have, and what's the problem? Now, go ahead and feel free to pause this and think about this for a minute. And think about answering this question as if it were on an exam. What is the problem in the trolley problem? Okay. Now, this is a standard, roughly 2-point question, let's say. Pause for a second, think. All right. Okay. If you answered, oh, the problem is whether to hit one person with the trolley or hit 5 people with the trolley. This is not correct, right? That is not, in fact, the trolley problem. That would get at most 1 point out of 2. That's a piece of the trolley problem, because honestly, the choice whether to kill 5 or kill 1 is actually pretty easy. That's not really a problem. What would be the problem if that was the only trouble? If you had said instead, oh, well, the problem is, right, that there's this other case, there's this doctor case, and in the doctor case, you'd have to face the choice of cutting somebody up or for their organs or not cutting them up for their organs. Again, all by itself, that case is not much of a problem. That's not the whole answer. The problem, right, as Thomson puts it, and as she frames the article, is that our intuitions in the trolley case, right, which is not the trolley problem, the trolley case, right, contradict our intuitions in the doctor case, even though they seem to be morally equivalent. Right? It seems like our reasons for saying that we ought to turn the trolley to kill the 1 instead of the 5 don't support the idea that we should operate on the 1 patient to save the 5. And that our intuitions in not operating on the 1 patient don't necessarily transfer over to the trolley case and tell us not to turn the trolley to kill the 1 instead of the 5. Okay? That's the actual problem. And a very careful reading would reveal that. That's the full 2-point answer. Okay, and so read carefully. It's always a thing. Okay, and so something we'll talk about this question later. But the question is, does the difference between killing and letting die make a difference? Okay, well, make a difference to what? Well, to whether or not the trolley problem is a problem. And of course, then I'd ask you to explain why or why not. This would be like something like a 5-point question. So it requires a short paragraph to respond to. And again, if you should pause for a second. Think about how you would really answer that if you were doing an exam right now. And if you're not really sure how you'd get started on that question, well, then you didn't really pay enough attention to the section about killing and letting die, why we're bringing in that distinction, what work that's supposed to do, and whether it's successful in doing that work or not. Right? The major section of that paper, and certainly something that should be focused on. Okay. If rights are the most important thing, morally speaking, how must we respond to Thomson's cases? Again, this is a major section of certainly the early part of the article. What do you do if rights are the most important thing? And we'll discuss this in a minute. But again, if you don't really have any idea how you'd answer this question, or if your idea is rather vague, then you should go back and take a closer look at the piece. If utility or the greatest good is the most important thing, morally speaking, how must we respond to Thomson's cases? That is the doctor case and the trolley driver case, right? Well, again, this is a pretty important question that we'll talk about here in a minute. But if you don't at this time have a really good idea of how you'd answer that, again, take a closer look. It's a major important thing. Okay, and then finally, this is a more of a reflective question at the end of the things. What are you supposed to do when your feelings about what is moral contradict a good moral principle? Okay, well, we're going to circle back around to that one because that one's more in the line of something of a final summation kind of a question. All right, so into the meat and potatoes. So the first thing is that Thompson does is provides us with the details of the cases. Okay, this is a direct quote here, and we'll go and read it just to, so we're all on the same page here. She says, suppose you are the driver of a trolley. The trolley rounds a bend, and there come into view ahead 5 track workmen who've been repairing the track. The track goes through a bit of a valley at this point, and the sides are steep, so you must stop the trolley if you were to avoid running the 5 men down. You step on the brakes, but alas, they don't work. Now suddenly you see a spur of track leading off to the right. You can turn the trolley onto it, and thus save the life of 5 men on the straight track ahead. Unfortunately, there is 1 track workman on the spur of that track. He can no more get off the track in time than the 5 can, so you will kill him if you turn the trolley onto him. Is it morally permissible for you to turn the trolley? Okay? So a few things about this case. First off, notice what we could have done. We could have talked about a case in which nobody was on any tracks at all. Right? We could have absolutely done that. And then we would have learned absolutely nothing from those cases. What do you do if you're on, if you're driving a train and there's no one on the tracks? Well, you just keep going, no problem, okay? So there's a temptation that a lot of people have to try and change the cases or to say, well, why would one person just be on the track or why would they be on the track when trains were running? Why wouldn't they have just shut down because none of that makes an actual example, right? We can't actually talk about our ethical intuitions or our moral principles and what kinds of conflicts they have with each other if we just, sort of modify things. So the reason the cases are constructed to be a problem is to be a problem, right? So changing the case to make it not a problem anymore doesn't let us learn anything. Okay, so that is number one, right? But now here's the second thing. Let's just think about what the common person would say to a case like this. I mean, think of what you yourself would say to a case like this. Okay, and many psychologists have done this. They've sort of gauged people's moral intuitions about things like this. They've when they ask people tend to say overwhelmingly, well, yeah, you're allowed to turn the trolley. Some people will even go further, say, not only would you be allowed to turn the trolley away from the 5 and toward the 1, perhaps you'd even be morally required to do so. And you might be able to see how such an argument would go. But in any case, the idea is that it seems reasonably clear that one is at least permitted to turn the trolley in cases like this. That tends to be the point we get out of this one. Okay, it looks something like this, right? If you want a fun little animation, well, it's not animation; it's a sketch. There you go. This is the trolley driver case, as Thompson names it. Okay. All right, and so again, that's not really the problem, right? All by itself, it's just okay, fine. That's a case of choosing, a lesser evil versus a greater evil. Again, not a big problem. The second case starts to introduce the problem. That's I call it here the doctor case. Thompson herself doesn't really give this case much of a name. She says, consider a second hypothetical case. This time you are to imagine yourself to be a surgeon, a truly great surgeon. Among other things you transplant organs, and you are such a great surgeon that the organs you transplant always take. Again, why put that in there? Well, because if you had to worry about them not saying that, it wouldn't be as good of an example. Again, the purpose of the example is to very purely examine our moral intuitions. And so we're going to write in a lot of stuff that doesn't, it may not be completely realistic. And again, that's not really the point. Okay. So at the moment, you have 5 patients who need organs. 2 need 1 lung each, 2 need a kidney each, and the 5th needs heart. What a coincidence. If they do not get those organs today, they will all die. If you find organs for them today, you can transplant the organs and they will all live. But where to get the lungs, the kidneys, and the heart? Well, the time is almost up when a report is brought to you that a young man who has come into your clinic for his yearly checkup has exactly the right blood type and is in excellent health. Lo, you have a potential donor. All you need to do is cut him up and distribute his parts among the 5 who need them. You ask, but he says, sorry, I deeply sympathize, but no. Would it be morally permissible for you to operate anyway? Okay. So again, I didn't really have a fun little sketch for this, and so I used a stock photo of, sort of a smiling doctor, right? So he says, of course, I always do the right thing. That's why I'm giving you organs to 5 other people. Okay, right. In general, I'd always be mistrustful of anybody who's, sort of any doctor is going to really just be this generally attractive. Usually attractive people don't make that much of themselves. Joke, sorry. One thing I will point out, though, is that many real doctors now wear their stethoscopes around their necks like that, with the earpiece on one side and sort of listening piece on the other side. They used to sort of wear them a lot more like neckties, and that was how you sort of told a TV doctor from like a real doctor, is that the TV doctors would sort of throw them over the back of their neck like that. But then all of the TV doctors on ER did that, and everybody thought it looked so cool that now most real doctors actually wear their stethoscopes that way, so you can't really tell anymore. So there you go. Okay, so look, here's the thing. Almost everybody thinks it's permissible to turn the trolley, and almost everybody thinks it's not permissible to operate on the patient, right? The patient says, yeah, I sympathize, but no, you're not allowed to just cut them up anyway, right? That's the overwhelming moral intuition in those cases. And those two beliefs, they not only appear to be inconsistent, they are in fact inconsistent, right? They cannot both be true. Okay, it seems like these two cases are morally equivalent in that way, such that our ideas about the morality of those cases really ought to be the same for one as they are for the other. So what's motivating this, right? Well, so on the one hand, when you look closely at why you think we really should be able to turn the trolley, you get something like this principle of the greatest good, right? This utility principle, the principle of consequences. Okay. And so because we covered earlier in the week something about moral arguments, that would be handy to have another couple of moral arguments to take a look at. And you'll notice that there's a very common format for a moral argument. You've got a moral principle in one premise. You've got a statement about a particular case that fits that moral principle, and then you draw your requisite conclusion. Okay, so in premise one, we say, given two options, it is at least morally permissible to choose the option with the most benefit and the least cost. Right? That sounds pretty plausible. It seems like that should be a moral principle, if any should be. Our second premise says that turning the trolley and having the doctor operate both have the most benefit and the least cost of the available options, which again, that seems pretty obviously true. Turning the trolley ends up saving the lives of 5 people at the cost of 1. Having the doctor operate ends up saving 5 lives at the cost of 1. And so if you don't turn the trolley, right, you lose 5 lives, right, at the cost of saving 1. And if you don't operate, you lose 5 lives at the cost of saving 1, right? So again, it seems like the principle has a very, very clear application in this case. And that this answers our earlier question about this idea of utility or duration. If that's the most important thing, well, then it's pretty obvious that you are allowed to turn the trolley, perhaps even required to turn the trolley, and allowed to operate, perhaps even required to operate. Okay? And so the conclusion we get here from these two premises, if these were both true, they would give us this statement: turning the trolley and performing the operation are at least morally permissible. Right? They could be even more, but they're at least morally permissible. And so the result is that on pain of incoherence, you either have to accept that it is permissible after all for the doctor to operate, or else that the greatest good principle is not as good a moral principle after all. That is, that premise 1 is false. Okay. Now, both of these things are fairly unpleasant. Okay. Both of them require you to say, well, given that I've now thought about this and I want to try and be intellectually consistent here, that means I'm going to have to give up on one of two things that I would otherwise think is true. Either A, I have to give up on how I feel about the doctor case, or I have to give up on this idea that between two choices, the choice with the better consequences is the better choice. Okay. And that helps us to answer some of that last question, starts to give us a hint. What do we do when a really good moral principle or a really good idea about morality comes into conflict with just how we happen to feel about it? It's like, well, maybe you're going to have to change the way you feel about something. In this case, the question is, what do we change how we feel about? Because they both seem to be pretty darn good. Okay. Now, of course, we have another potential moral principle we could use, something that's going to tell us why things are right or wrong. And it might be that things are right or wrong because they either respect or violate somebody's rights. Okay, and so here we have another argument. Our first premise is that it is always morally impermissible to violate people's rights. You're never morally able to do that. Okay? And premise 2, our specific application premise, it says turning the trolley violates the rights of the one who would not otherwise be in danger. Okay. the other one on the track, and performing the operation violates the rights of the patient. Again, the patient would not ordinarily be in danger. And so taking a situation in which they're not in danger and making them in danger, right, or really not just in danger, they're going to die in each case, you're taking their life. That would be an easy case of violating somebody's rights. If nothing else violates somebody's rights, killing them seems to violate their rights. Okay? And so we get from those two premises the conclusion. Again, if those two premises were true, they would have to give us that turning the trolley and performing the operation are both morally impermissible. Because in premise 1, we have a statement about what makes something morally impermissible, and in premise 2, we have an assertion that these things fit that criteria. So there you go. And so, again, that's fine. And on pain of incoherence, you either have to accept that it is impermissible to turn the trolley. You can't do it. Okay, again, that runs contrary to your general idea. Or else you have to say that the rights principle is just not as good a moral principle after all. That is, that premise 1 is false. It is not always wrong to violate someone's rights. Not even in the cases of really serious rights violations, like in this case, killing somebody. Okay? Again, both of those ideas, the idea that you can turn the trolley and that rights are important, those are both really good ideas. And it seems like they, in these kinds of cases, come into conflict and put you in a position of having to give up one of them or the other one, trying to have to decide which. Okay, well, that's unpleasant, right? So on the one hand, we either have to give up our ideas about the doctor case or give up the utility principle, which seems like a good principle. Or on the other hand, we have to give up our the way we feel about the trolley case, or give up the rights principle, which again, pretty good principle. So this is quite a pickle. This is in fact the problem that she talks about. This is the trolley problem. And there are two possible ways to escape this problem. Okay. One way would be to show that the doctor case and the trolley driver case are, after all, not morally equivalent. Okay, that there is some difference in those cases that explains our different attitudes about them. Right, this will be one way out of trouble. We say, oh look, the fact that they seem like they're a very similar case, morally speaking, is neither here nor there. There's some difference in between them. That means we can judge one way and judge the other way, and not actually be incoherent after all. Right, that would be one thing you could do. That's one strategy. A different strategy would be to find some other moral principle, some principle other than the rights principle or other than this utility or greatest good principle that would give us the right answer for each of those cases. That is the one we expect, the one that says you can turn the trolley and you can't operate on the patient. Right? We want to be able to have both of those. And maybe there is some moral principle, some third principle that really does do that. Thompson's going to explore a little bit of both of these, right, in the first half of the article before going on to sort of suggest some solution herself. Okay, which actually is going to be her main strategy is going to go for number 2. Right. All right, but here's her first suggestion. She says, here's what you might say to try and solve this problem. And so I've put a 1 in parentheses over there by killing versus letting die to indicate again that that's strategy number 1 there. That's trying to show that these two cases, the doctor case and the trolley driver case, are not morally equivalent after all. Okay. And so here's the way it goes. So on the one hand, it seems that the trolley driver kills 5 if he does not turn the trolley. Okay, think about that. It seems to make sense, right? If you're driving the thing and you don't turn it and instead hit 5, you've hit those 5 people. Okay, you've killed them. And if you do turn the trolley, you're doing that intentionally. You see the one on the track and you're killing the one that you turn the trolley onto if you do that. And so if you think about it that way, it seems to make sense to say that the trolley driver should turn the trolley because killing 5 is worse than killing 1. Okay, so far so good. The doctor case, right, if he doesn't do anything to help these 5 who need organs, he just lets them die. He does not actually kill them, okay? And he does kill the one person if he does operate, if he decides to take his organs out, that does kill people. And so since killing 1 is worse than letting 5 die, well, then he may not operate. Okay? Do you see how this idea of killing versus letting die? There's, in one cases we have killing versus killing, in the other case we have killing versus letting die, and that's why they're not the same case, right? And if that was true, that would be a really excellent way out of this conundrum. Okay. And so what Thompson's response is going to be to say, well, okay, fine, consider a different case then, right? I mean, we could just modify these cases ever so slightly so that we're really comparing apples to apples again, and then we get the same kind of conflict between these basic moral principles, okay? She says, if the cases are not the same in every morally relevant way, then they can't really do their job, which is to test our moral principles. So instead of the trolley driver case, she gives us what she calls something like a bystander at the track, or what I call the trolley bystander case. And she writes it this way. She says, in that case, you've been strolling by the trolley track, and you can see the situation at a glance. The driver saw the 5 on the track ahead. He stamped on the brakes failed, so he fainted. What to do? Well, here is the switch which you can throw, thereby turning the trolley yourself. Of course, you will kill 1 if you do. Okay? So, looks a little bit like this. Okay? I assume you probably don't actually look anything like the person at the switch, but again, assume that's you. Now, you saw the trolley going, right? And it's just a hazard to those 5 that are there. And you might be thinking to yourself, hey, weren't these track workmen? You know, how are they working on the track if they're sort of tied to it? It doesn't really matter. Just say they're tied to it, right? Like I said, these kinds of cases have lots and lots of different variations. And the important part is that it allows us to test our moral intuitions. So here we go. If the trolley is just going to continue on and be a threat to those 5, it seems like you would be letting those 5 die if you did not pull the switch. But you would be killing 1 if you did, right? And I think, again, when you put the situation to this way to most people, they say, well, you know, look, whether I'm killing them or whether I'm letting them die, at the end of things, you're talking about the number of people dead if I don't pull the switch and the number of people dead if I do. And if I don't pull the switch, 5 people end up dead. And if I do pull the switch, 1 person ends up dead. What does it matter if I sort of kill them versus, you know, let them die, right? What's the real difference if we're just trying to, get the best overall consequences here? And that's how most people tend to think about this case. And so they say, look, it's at least permissible to turn the trolley, even here. And yet, they would say generally, those very same people would usually say, well, the doctor can't operate on his patient. You can't do that. So the problem recurs. Okay. So now the trolley bystander lets 5 die if she does not pull the lever and kills 1 if she does. Okay, the doctor, remember, lets 5 die if he does not operate and kills 1 if he does. And so it doesn't seem like any plausible moral principle should allow us to decide the morality of each case differently from the other. That is, that utilities still tell us that you can turn the trolley, the bystander anyway, and that the doctor can operate. And the rights principle tells us that the bystander can't turn the trolley and the doctor can't operate. And again, that's hard. Okay, we have to give up something. We have to give up principle, or we have to give up the way we judge one of these cases. Okay? All right. Well, look, say that you disagree that the bystander is only letting the 5 die if she does not pull the lever, or you're not really sure of what to make about the relative importance of killing versus letting die. Maybe you might say, well, look, maybe it's worse to kill 1 than to let 5 die, and so if both these cases are the same, yeah, I don't know. So again, we can modify the cases again to try and make it a little clearer, so we don't have to really worry about killing versus letting die. Okay, and this is where I bring in the case that I call here the mistaken doctor. Thompson calls it transplant or something like that. And she writes it this way. She says, the surgeon was badly overworked last fall. Some of his assistants in the clinic were out sick, and the surgeon had to take over their duties dispensing drugs. While feeling particularly tired one day, he became careless and made the terrible mistake of dispensing Chemical X to 5 of the day's patients. Chemical X. Now, Chemical X works differently in different people. In some, it causes lung failure, in others, kidney failure, in others, heart failure. So these 5 patients who now need parts need them because of the surgeon's carelessness. Indeed, if he does not get them the parts they need so that they die, he will have killed them. Okay, so we're going to modify the doctor case a little bit and have this one, this mistaken doctor case, go against the trolley driver case. Okay, because now, okay, the doctor is looking at a case of killing 1, right? Namely the patient here that they're going to cut off for parts, or killing 5, which is these other people who need the organs. And then that's the exact same choice that the trolley driver faces, killing 1 versus killing 5. And so now the cases are, sort of apples to apples once again. And does that get us out of the problem? Again, no. We still, when we're comparing apples to apples, look like we want to say, well, look, you're allowed to turn the trolley, but you're not allowed to operate on the patient, right? Even if you would have killed those other 5. Okay. And so if the reason that the trolley driver can turn the trolley is that killing 5 is worse than killing 1, then the mistaken doctor can operate because killing 5 is worse than killing 1. And if the mistaken doctor can't operate, then neither can the driver turn the trolley. And again, so we have the problem repeated once again. So this whole distinction between killing and letting die does not get us out of things. It's a strategy. It's one way that somebody might very creatively and cleverly think you could get out of this problem. You don't really get out of the problem. right? We can just modify the cases ever so slightly, and the problem simply recurs. Okay, so there's the answer to that question. It's a fairly involved answer. Okay, all right. Well, so how about we consider maybe a different moral principle? Let's try this one on for size. Okay. And so what Thompson does here is introduces what she calls sort of a Kantian moral principle. We'll talk about Kant's moral theory. Kant is a very important moral thinker, and we'll talk about this very principle later in the course. But for now, okay, we're going to summarize it as follows. So the Kantian principle in question is, do not ever treat people like things. That is, do not use people as a means only. That's sort of closer to Kant's original language there. And so here's how it applies in the case. It seems very clear that what the doctor is doing is using his healthy patient to save the 5 who need organs, while the trolley bystander does not really use the one that is on the track to save the 5. And so this tends to mean that the doctor cannot operate, okay, because they use the 5 as a means, but the bystander really can pull the lever, okay? And so this would be a principle that seems like it gives us the right answer in each case, right? Well, by now, you should probably be able to anticipate the way that Thompson responds to challenges of this kind. She says, okay, fine, consider a slightly different case. Let's modify it a little bit. Maybe let's say, oh, you were making assumptions about the way this case worked, okay? And so she says, instead of a lever and a side track, right, consider a straight track with a footbridge over it. And on that footbridge is a really large person. I'm paraphrasing that quote here. It is clear to the bystander on the bridge that the large person's mass would be enough to stop the trolley from continuing on to kill the 5. Look, in some versions of this, and in some articles, it's a really large person. Sometimes people think that that's like, you know, a little, you shouldn't really do that. And so sometimes it's somebody with like this really heavy and sturdy backpack that's strapped to them very thoroughly, whatever, right? So the idea is, though, that there's this person that, you know, pushing them over the footbridge would save the 5, and not pushing them over the footbridge would cost the lives of the 5, okay? And so the question is it morally permissible to push this large person off of the bridge, right? Okay, now I have a few things. This is, again, if you wanted a little illustration of that, here you go, okay? Now, I have a few things to say about this. Now, think about the case yourself, and think about, again, how you think, not only yourself, but how you think most people would respond to a case like this, right? And right off the bat, I want you to notice a few things, okay? In fact, this is one of these things that's been studied a lot. Psychologists have asked people what they think about cases like this, and have found some very interesting things. The way that people feel about such cases is not always completely rational, right? So the idea is this: that in this particular experiment from Green and others, they set it up this way, and they said, okay, here's, you know, you've got the setup as here, right? And so in one scenario, what they call the standard footbridge case, what you're being asked to do is push this person off of the bridge with your hands. You're asking, would you just shove them in order to save the life of these other 5 people? Okay. And then they asked people about the pole case, right? What they call the footbridge pole case. And that's where you're asked to push the person off of the bridge with a long pole in order to save the 5. There's also a footbridge switch case, which is where you'd open a trapdoor with a switch while standing right beside the person. And then there's the remote footbridge case, where you open a trapdoor with a switch while watching from a distance, okay, with a camera, right? Now you see that the way that these things are broken down, so over toward the right, if you look, you'll see that only one of them actually involves direct physical contact, and the others involve no physical contact. But that doesn't seem to be the feature that makes really all the difference to people. Also, there's the question of spatial proximity, right? Whether you're sort of near them or not near them. Now, so 2 of them you're sort of very near them, and 2 of them you're not near them at all. So with the pole or with the remote, you're further away from them. But with the footbridge switch or the standard footbridge case, you're right next to them. And so, but that doesn't appear to be the thing that makes the most difference. It's rather the use of personal force as opposed to not using personal force. People feel better about pushing a button no matter where they are than they do about sort of using their hands or a pole to push somebody off a bridge, okay? Now, this is something we do know about certain kinds of technology, is that certain kinds of technology or certain kinds of situations make it sort of easier to do a thing, or in some cases make something sort of harder to do a thing. And this is something we always have to think about when we design our technology, especially what you can do by pushing buttons, okay? Because any technology that makes it easier to do the wrong thing is going to be a problem, right? It's going to lead to problem. Any technology that makes it harder to do the wrong thing is going to be, in general, pretty useful, okay? or contrariwise, that makes it easier to do the right thing. Now notice, whether it's psychologically easier, right, to push this person off the bridge or not, it really has no bearing on whether it's the right thing to do. Okay, that's a question we have to settle through ethics here. Psychology is not going to help us. It'll tell us how people tend to feel about these cases. It will not tell us the morality of these cases. That requires a little bit more analysis. It requires us to look at the reasons why something is moral or isn't. Okay, and so we do know that people will react more or less irrationally in this case. Okay, look, you know, if you're willing to condemn someone to death by pushing a button, right, pulling a lever, or letting go of your tiger's leash, I like that example, then you ought to be willing to push that person off of a bridge. Okay, the specific means of killing the one to save the lives of the five really is morally irrelevant, despite the fact that people do have some psychological ways of loading one of those cases as opposed to another. Okay, so despite the fact that people often feel like there is a difference, that difference is not a matter of morality. And so that's one of the things that you'll have to learn, is separating the kinds of ways that you feel about cases from some reasoning about why something ought to be or ought not to be the right thing to do. Okay. And so again, it can be reasonably clear once we think about it that the bystander at the switch case is morally equivalent to the bystander on the bridge case. Okay, because the bystander at the switch kills one person by pulling a lever and sending a train at them, right? And the footbridge case, where it was where you push a button, push somebody with a pole, whatever, in order to save five, right? It's the same thing. It doesn't really matter how you kill them, whether you kill them with a trolley or whether you kill them by pushing them in front of some trolley. Okay, and then so the bystander on the bridge clearly uses the large person to save the five in the same way that the doctor uses the healthy patient to save the five. So either both actions are permissible or neither one is. Okay, so that nice proposal, it doesn't get us out of the trouble. Okay, and so here at the end, we've got a few different lessons that we might take from this. So first off, I want you to absolutely get this from the very beginning here. If something is good or bad, morally speaking, it is so for some reason. Okay, and it's really good to know what those reasons are. And sometimes even when we identify plausible reasons, sometimes, as this thing says, sometimes they conflict with each other. Okay, and so in cases like these, like the trolley problem cases, either the principle really is inconsistent, right, in which case it must be replaced with a better one, or else our judgments are mistaken, in which case they must be changed. Okay, that happens often, right, and you're just going to have to be prepared for that. And so if your feelings are inconsistent with some good moral principle, well, so much the worse for your feelings. Okay, we're going to be trying to do this as rationally as possible. And so last thing I want to tell you here is ethics is hard. Okay, and you can't really do it without running the risk of having to change your mind about something. And ideally you might change your mind about a great deal of things, right? But again, if you do change your mind, you should have some good reason for doing so, and you should always be looking for a good reason to change your mind about stuff. Otherwise, you'll just miss those reasons because they're out there. So last thing I want to say about this is that to some degree, I've sort of thrown you to the wolves right away, having you read the trolley problem, sort of first thing, right? Having the first real thing about ethics you read. And in a sense, this is intentional, right? It's a hard article. It's a long article. It's very subtle. The reasoning will give you something of a headache. I guarantee you weren't able to just blow through it all in one sitting and really get what was going on in there. That's all true. And part of the reason I've done that is to show you something of an end point. Okay, it's an example of really good moral argumentation. Okay, and it's an example of what you really have to do in order to do ethics well. Okay, and so I do want you to have a picture of what that's like and what kind of effort that really entails right from the very beginning. I don't want to mislead here. That ethics is hard. Okay, like anything else, you sort of get out what you put in. Okay, and that anybody can get better at moral reasoning, but it's not one of those things that just sort of happens naturally or without doing anything, right? It requires practice and sort of commitment like anything else. So that said, enjoy the course as we come, and there will be we'll talk about more very interesting ideas in ethics as the semester progresses.